So we can move on to what you're going to say next here, which was I liked what you said with this. So pulling from your LinkedIn comment, while talking with Sam about it, I realized what's needed is similar to a professional engineer organization for CEOs, arguably the whole C-suite. It wouldn't require quite as high a bar as engineers, given that it needs to be accessible by all. Some basic online ethics and legal training courses with certification organization are required for any company above 10 employees, and additional training as a CEO level up. So I thought that was an interesting thought, and it does relate to what we were just talking about with ethics. Um, why don't you expand on that? And in my view, don't you think that while I'm not going to call it useless, but like when you're operating at that level with millions or billions in your budgets, that sort of thing, I think just becomes it's just for show, right?
Well, so it can be. I mean, obviously, money does bend rules in ways that are not accessible to a lot of people. But let me just describe briefly how engineering certification works. That you
Okay.
get become a professional engineer.
Yeah.
That certification allows you to stamp documents, so that way
Yeah.
you can build machines, build
Yeah.
buildings, whatever else. It's also the gateway to be able to get the insurance that you need to be able to be protected. So that way, if you do make a mistake,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
insurance will cover the cost of that, right?
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And most governments have legal requirements that you're not allowed to call yourself an engineer or do engineering work
Right.
unless you have the certification,
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
right?
Okay.
So, engineer, and that's not to say that there aren't bad engineers. I mean, we've seen examples of that throughout history of engineers that have made
Yeah.
decisions for all sorts of reasons, but then they lose their certification and they can't do it again, right? Because they're no longer a certified
Yeah.
engineer. And so the idea on the CEO side is having some sort of a certification that on the face of it means nothing. Like, oh, I'm a certified CEO or whatever. But that if you tie back things like the business's insurance, so you have a company like OpenAI, which has insurance for for their infrastructure, for their staff, for their operations, and on and on and on and on. And that if you have the certification that is designed to ensure that there's an ethical component, that decisions are not being made for very bad reasons. Like typically a CEO is making all their decisions for their shareholders, right? What's best for the shareholders and not necessarily what's best for the environment, not what's best for the employees. But if part of this structure, the goal is that you need to be making good decisions, and I mean there's the fluffiness there that's hard to define. You're making good decisions, and if you start making really bad decisions, like an oil company would make, where the idea of we're going to make it look like we're working on solar power, where we're actually working to undermine solar power,
Yeah.
and that becomes obvious, the CEO of that company loses their certification. And so that means they can't be CEO of that company anymore, because then the company's going to lose their insurance. They're going to lose
Yeah.
other certifications that they have. Like, this is assuming that, it becomes tied in with regulation and everything else. So that then now that CEO has a real incentive not to make that decision. The corporation itself has a incentive not to make that decision, because if they lose their insurance, they can't operate, right? So it's not
Yeah.
going to stop them from becoming profitable and making decisions and moving in a direction, but
Yeah.
it's going to constrain them more towards the good than the bad.
Yeah.
Will it be abused? Will some people ignore it? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
That's always going to happen. But at least now there's some sort of consequence,
Yeah.
right? Whether and how powerful that consequence is really depends on how it's
Yeah.
developed. But the thing is that it's at some point somebody decided engineers needed to be held accountable,
Right.
and that infrastructure was created, and it became more and more ingrained within society to have some meaning.
Yeah.
And my idea here is that the C-suite should have something similar, so that way they can be held accountable. That
Yeah.
doesn't require, like right now AI is the Wild West. It
Yeah.
takes decades for laws to catch up. But as these new technologies are developed, if if there's a mechanism in place that's independent of law, that it might be a little fluffy, but there's a social pressure there. It can help keep things more towards what's beneficial to society, to shareholders, to employees, to everyone,
Yeah.
versus necessarily benefiting just shareholders and the CEO.
Yeah. So I guess the key thing there, because my exactly right when you were saying it, the word popped in my mind, like accountability. And like I just if we're to continue the parallelism to like engineer, like hard engineering, right? Like bridge falls down, people die, clearly someone fucked up, heads need to roll.
Yeah.
What does that look like in AI? Like, right? Because like you can just have the Zucks of the world just being like, oh well, it's too indirect, like, you know, millions of 16-year-old girls are self-harm and like, it has nothing to do with Instagram. Instagram's good for like how do you make those,
Yeah.
connections
And I
and
mean,
whatever, right? Like,
there's a lot of questions on how to implement that, but on a decision by decision basis, that I think you can build up a like a moral philosophy, an ethical philosophy on how decisions are made,
okay.
and that there would have to be some sort of a tribunal that assesses, like, you had this amount of information saying it was bad, you made this decision for these reasons for this benefit, and either you ignored them or you didn't, right?
Yeah.
Because either you throttled back your profit decisions in order to make these consequences worse, or you increased your profit motivations that exacerbated these problems, right? So I mean, obviously decision making in businesses can be very esoteric and involve a lot of factors, but you know it's not a perfect system, but it's not going to become a perfect system unless you start doing something.